If you've been paying attention to the news, you'd know that New York City has once again become a very dangerous place, people. But it's not the type of dangerous that you might expect in a big city. It's not drive-by shootings in the suburbs or cars getting stolen from parking lots. It's the random attacks in broad daylight in the middle of crowded areas type danger. You can't walk around many parts of New York City anymore without having to worry about some weirdo smearing shit on your face or some homeless guy stabbing you with a screwdriver. And a lot of this random sick stuff is happening on the subway system. There was a brief period in the middle of winter when these random assaults and killings peaked here in NYC. The subway system was so bad for a while that people stopped using it. There were tales of hordes of homeless people sleeping on platforms, junkies pooping on trains, sickos pushing people onto the tracks, and stuff I can't even mention on this channel. So of course I had to see it. So I went there. The goal was to take the subway all over the city and walk around some of the most dangerous stops and see what I could see. This is that journey. The subway is not that bad. There's a lot of weirdos, but you wouldn't die. Probably. For all of you who want to see bad and sad, this isn't it. It's Happy Train Day. Kinda. See, there had been all these news reports about all the chaos that was happening on the subways for weeks leading up to the trip I took. I was like, I gotta get up there. The subways had been getting progressively worse. People were jumping turnstiles, smoking, doing drugs, sleeping, camping, and attacking poor innocent people. New Yorkers who had been riding the subways for years called the scene surreal, and there were calls for action. It got really bad when homeless people and drug addicts began stabbing and even shooting people on the platforms underground. It was terrible. One frequent rider said, "It's so bad down there. I see things almost every day, things I can't speak about out loud. Have you seen the subway lately?" At one point, at least 7 people were assaulted, robbed, injured, or killed in one weekend alone on the subways here. There was blood all over the place. They were using hatchets, poles, knives, guns, screwdrivers, whatever they had to attack people. So the mayor, Eric Adams, issued an emergency of sorts and sent out teams of NYPD and a bunch of outreach workers and counselors into the subways to make arrests and get people some help. No more smoking, no more drugs, no more sleeping, doing barbecues. People were doing barbecues on the subway? That's gross. Anyways, days before I arrived, most of that stuff was being enforced, and I was kind of disappointed. I wanted to show you guys how bad is for New York City's crime. I walked around every platform I came to and focused on the stops that had a really bad reputation. I saw some NYPD standing around and possibly some social workers, but it was clear that most of the troublemakers and the lunatics had been sent back into the shadows where they came from. But I didn't want to waste an opportunity. So I thought I'd get some great footage from the trains and show you guys what it looks like. Most of the footage we're going to see is on the 7 train heading westbound from Queens into Midtown Manhattan. We'll see some other general footage, and we're also about to talk to a couple people who are lifelong New Yorkers. I'm going to ask them about crime, politics, and of course, the New York City subway system.
Well, honestly speaking, of course, since COVID, ridership is down. Prior to COVID, there were moments during rush hour, like if you want to ride like a sardine, you'd have to ride like a sardine. For the most part, the subway system is reliable. It's not cheap anymore. It's expensive for an adult to ride the subway. One way is $2.75. When I first moved to New York, I think 40 years ago, I think it was only 75 cents, so it's gone up considerably over the years. There are peaks and valleys about riding the subway. The thing about the subway is it gets you from point A to point B fast, real fast, if you know how to use the system and if you know where you're going. When it shuts down or breaks down, then you have to scramble on how to get on another line or another bus or something. As I think I mentioned to you in a text or an email once when you said you were going to come and do some video work on the number 7, riding the subway, the number 7 line especially, between the hours of 2:30 to 4:30, you're dealing with students from all over the place, junior high schools, Catholic schools, colleges, and the trains are packed with just annoying people. I should say people because students are still people, but they can be annoying, with backpacks and noise and phones and radios and just being loud, being rude, pushy.
Yeah, it was fine. Nobody was really rude. I actually was surprised. So I went down there. The whole reason I went to do this journey was because I had heard about all of the crimes that were happening on the subway platforms, people getting stabbed and murdered and shit smeared on them and harassed and by homeless people and mentally ill and crazy people and druggies and all this stuff. And so I was like, I got to see this. So I went there as part of another trip that I was doing. And right before I got there, the mayor, Eric Adams, decided that he was going to crack down on all this stuff and he was going to have a police presence and all this stuff, which is good for you guys. I was disappointed because I feel like I didn't get to see the true extent of how bad it was getting in the subways. How bad was it getting? What did I miss?
Well, I don't think it's gotten much improvement. You still see homeless people down in the subway stations. As far as the crime, it's hit or miss where and when it can happen. It could be in broad daylight. It could be in the middle of the night. It could be at rush hour. Most of your crimes in the subway tend to happen in busier stations like Times Square, Union Square, or Herald Square, where there's always a lot of congestion and a lot of people. Yes, there has been some very serious crimes too, where people have been shoved in front of trains or shoved into a train or, where I've actually seen people kind of approach other people. One word of advice that I always tell people, just to be on the safe side, I always ride in the train car where the conductor is. At least there's an employee. Versus where the first car, you've got the motorman, but he's kind of like locked into his little caboose or little booth or whatever. At least with the conductor, he's in and out, or he's a little more visible. You know what I'm saying? But then again, in this day and age with cell phones, it's just a click of 911 and you can get right through to somebody if you had to, I've actually dialed 911 in the past when I've seen just deplorable situations of homeless people in my own neighborhood. And it's like, no. Let's clean this up off the street right now. Not a block and a half from where I live. I don't want this, And then I've stood there when the police or the fire department comes or an ambulance comes and they're like, oh no, not this guy again. And they have to literally pick him up off the street, throw him in the back of an ambulance and off to a hospital he goes, or she. I shouldn't just distinguish that it's just a man, but you've got men and women that are homeless in New York, right here in my own neighborhood in Sunnyside, Queens, there are people that live right underneath the subway stations. And it's like nobody's moving them. They're just like there with all their belongings and bags of stuff and boxes of stuff and a mattress and blankets and, and everybody's like tripping over these people just to get in and out of the subway station and nothing seems to happen, It's crazy.
Now, you've been there for 40 years in New York City. And 40 years ago would have been in the 80s when you got there.
1982 was exactly the year I moved here.
As a child, I remember seeing images of New York City on the subways with the graffiti, and it was just a terrible, dangerous, gross place for most of the 80s until Rudy came in and helped clean the place up. Mm-hmm. Tell people how bad it was in New York in the 80s and compare that to now, how it is now. It doesn't seem like it's nearly as bad.
Well, don't get me wrong. I want to say things have improved, but things have also demographically changed too. We still have filth. We still have crime. We still have graffiti. We still have expense. We still have homelessness. It just seemed to be more in the limelight because it just pivoted from how life was here in New York City in the 60s and 70s into the 80s and the drugs of the 90s and the gangs of the 90s. Yes, Giuliani cleaned up a lot of the city of New York, but you want to know something? It still all exists. We still have a lot of illegal aliens here. We still have language barriers here. We still, like I said, have expense here. It just kind of, everything kind of goes in waves. All of a sudden there's a drop in homelessness and then it's back again. There's a drop in crime and then it's back again. Then there's a drop in graffiti and then it's all over the place again. 8.5 million people live within the 5 boroughs of New York. That's a lot of people. It's probably one of the most condensed areas on this planet,
Yeah.
But don't get me wrong. We're talking negative things, but there's a lot of positive things about the city of New York too.
Let's talk. Give everybody like the positive stuff that.
Okay. By the way, if I'm glancing down, I wrote a lot of little notes in preparation to my talk with you.
Glance away.
Okay. There's great energy here. Two of my favorite things about the city of New York is our live theater. Doesn't get any better than what happens here in the Big Apple. All of our sports teams, if you like sports, you're in the city of sports. Our transportation system is, for the most part, is really, really good. Besides the subway, we also have a bus system. We also have 3 major airports. We have commuter rails in and out of the city. We also have 4 seasons. Everybody likes all 4 seasons in New York, except right about now, most New Yorkers want to say ta-ta, goodbye to winter, and we like our spring. April, May, and June are very nice months here in New York. Food choices in restaurants. Doesn't get any better than that right here in the Big Apple, because there are people from all over the globe that live and work here, and they all bring their cultures, which is wonderful. And another one of my favorites, there's no limit on the number of pubs in the Big Apple, and it's a wonderful thing.
How do you feel about the direction New York's headed? Where would you like to see things go? Is there anything that is good or bad that frustrates you or makes you proud or what in the near future?
Well, of course, I'm a native New Yorker. I'm very proud of the city. I would like to see a little more discipline starting with our youth. Start from the ground, work your way up, I really believe that crime is out of control because I think there's not good parental guidance, and these adolescents become out of control. Have a little bit more strict upbringing, not only in the home, but in the schools too. I really think it would make a difference.
Yeah. So, it's just a matter of how do you make 15-year-olds behave?
With a little bit of threat. I think a field trip to Rikers Island might change their attitudes and minds about what incarceration would entail if you do something wrong, just bring it to the limelight, and say, hey, listen, you got to pay for your crime, I
got to ask you, best and worst mayors since you've lived there in 40 plus years, Jonathan?
I thought Mayor Koch was kind of a dodo bird, but I did like Mayor Giuliani because he did really, really crack down on crime and drugs, and he cleaned up the whole Times Square area. We went from prostitutions to a Disney-fied 42nd Street. You know what I'm saying? It really was pretty bad when I first moved here.
Ed Koch would be your worst mayor?
Yeah, because he was just a lot of noise. He just talked a lot, and I don't think he ever accomplished anything. You know what I mean? He would hang a sign on a street that would read, "Don't even think about parking here." And I thought, who's going to pay attention to that? Mayor Ed Koch? Of course someone's going to park here, and they did anyhow,
Yeah. Do you have any interesting subway stories of things that you saw where you were just like only in New York City?
Let's see. Well, lately, ever since the pandemic, you're seeing a lot more people on the subways with their pets. You're seeing a lot of animals now on the trains, and that's kind of interesting. It can be good. Some people are intimidated. For me, as long as you don't have a barking, biting Rottweiler, I'm okay, you know? If you got a small little dog or a dog on a leash that's under control, or, you know, there have been people that have gotten on the train with their cats, their ferrets, you know, don't even think about coming on the train with a snake because I'll be running the other direction, you know? But you'd be surprised how many people are bringing their pets on. I have seen attacks on people on the train, you know, in the evening hours, you know, and of course, you know enough, always make sure you get the conductor right away. And of course, as the train pulls into the station and the doors open, the criminals flee, you know. There are cases where people are sound asleep. You got people that sleep on the trains all night long, and they're trying to fix that up too, you know, because it's warm and it's cozy and it's constantly moving, you know, it's like a rocking chair to these people.
Yeah. I think the media likes to jump on and, you know, there'll be two people pushed in front of a subway and, you know, you'd think it was like end of the world up there in New York. I walked around. I intentionally go into bad areas to try to see if I can find what all the hype's all about. And sometimes I find it. There's been some cities and some situations I'm like, this is actually worse than I thought. Walking around the subways, I mean, I tried to go out of my way. I went to all the subways stations and areas that I had heard were bad, and I saw very few issues at all. And part of that might have been, you know, the mayor just announced he was going to crack down. There were some police around, but overall, I mean, it's a very pleasant experience. I don't like being very close to people. Mm-hmm. I don't like then they don't probably want to be close to me. That part I don't like, but it's cool. Everyone's nice, and you know you get where you're going to get, and you get out. And
I mean that's basically what it is. You ride it to get from point A to point B. I'm not riding it to like check out fashion. You know what I mean? Or I'm not riding it to make friends. I'm just going from point A to point B. But I am always on my guard. I always have that second pair of eyes in the back of my head. Always be aware of who's around you, who's in front of you, who's to your right, who's to your left. Just always be on your guard. Another thing, it's funny. It's like when I travel around the United States, one of the number one questions I'm always asked, because they're not amazed that I have a New York accent. They're just amazed that I carry my wallet in my front pocket. And I always say, you ride the New York City subway every day of your life. It becomes habitual. Your wallet is always in your front pocket, never in your back pocket. Your backpack, when you ride the train, if you're standing, you hold it in front of you. You never keep it on your back, you know? There's just the small little things. You just always know where your wallet, your keys, and your cell phone are at all times, you know?
Is the hype that everyone's leaving New York City overhyped? I know that there was a big exodus for a while when COVID first hit. There's a lot of people moving from the state of New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts and the whole Northeast down to where I am and further south into Florida. Do you hear stories? Are there a lot of people tell you they're just over the whole New York thing and they're leaving?
My best friend moved to North Carolina last year with his wife and son. And I see why, because I flew down to visit him and I thought, oh, wow. Look how clean it is here. Oh, wow. All your stores are just closed, but there's no bars and gates on any of the windows. Oh, wow. Everybody seems to be ultra friendly. Oh, wow. You know, people are courteous here. I mean, I get it. But at the same time, you know, New Yorkers get a bum rap because people think, oh, New Yorkers, they're all obnoxious. I'm like, no, they're not. New Yorkers are assertive people. Why? You live in a city of 8.5 million people. You can sometimes have to be a little assertive, you know? It's just a way of life, you know? We're not in some small little town in New Hampshire somewhere. We're in the biggest city on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and it's the cultural capital of the world. It's the financial capital of the world. There's no other city on this globe that ticks like this. There's pluses and minuses about the entire experience of being here for 40 years. But I will tell you this, there's no city like the city of New York.
I know. I give it a hard time sometimes. It's easy to make fun of. The people are actually very nice. I have to say, everybody's been really cool, and I don't need people to be nice. I just need people to not be rude and to be helpful. And they are. And I haven't really met a bad person. And I try to talk to a lot of people. I've been to New York City several times. And
I'll be on the train, and it's very obvious when you see tourists and they're holding subway maps and they're doing this, trying to figure out where they are and what they're doing. And I'll sometimes just say, do you need any help? And they're just delighted to know that if a New York person is going to offer assistance on how to ride the trains and where they have to go and how to get to where they're going. And I'm like, it's my pleasure. Even if they're getting off at my stop, I'll even tell you what staircase to take or what side of the street you need to be on. And, they're just people. They're tourists. We welcome them.
Yeah.
New York couldn't exist without our tourism.
Yeah. The problem with all that helpfulness and the courteousness is that then they come down into states like mine and then they get really rude and entitled. I don't know why New Yorkers are so nice up there. And they come down here and it's like they got like an attitude problem. Like, I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. But there is a little bit of a kind of an entitlement that they kind of carry around down here. Like, I'm from the New York Northeast. And it's like, nobody cares.
Yeah. But I will tell you this. The richest people around the globe all have residence here in the Big Apple. Money is not an issue to people who have it, and they all have a place in the Big Apple.
Yeah, but my God, I don't know how people can afford 95% of that city that lives middle or lower middle class can afford to live. I know they can clearly afford it, but I couldn't do it. The constant stress of rent and the people and the not knowing. I don't know. I couldn't do it. I'd be stressed. And if I was in my 20s, I could do it. But now that I'm older, I couldn't deal with all the day-to-day worries of what comes with living in a metropolis like that. I don't
Well,
know.
over the years, you learn how to budget. You learn how to spend your money and where to spend your money. Of course, many amenities in Midtown Manhattan will cost a lot more than they would in places like Queens, where I live. Clothing is more expensive in Manhattan. Going to the drugstore is more expensive in Manhattan. Going to a dry cleaners is much more expensive in Manhattan, where everything comes down a notch when you cross the river into Queens or even Brooklyn or Staten Island or the Bronx. It all depends on the neighborhood where you live, too. Yes, New York is expensive, but also people are paid fairly well. People are paid fairly well here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it evens out. Is Gary Carter the best Met to ever play?
He was a good ball player. Yes, he was. I have to say, he was a great Met. He was part of the '86 Mets. Yes.
Tom Seaver or Gary Carter? Who's better?
Well, Gary Carter was the catcher. Tom Seaver was a pitcher. Tom Seaver was a good ball player, too.
Yeah. What about Mookie Wilson? Was he maybe one of the best all-time Mets?
He's famous, yes.
Keith
you have
Hernandez.
to come to New York, Nick, and I'll take you out to Citi Field, and we'll go to a Met game.
Dwight Gooden.
One of my favorite places in New York.
Yeah, I actually should do that. That would be fun. I might actually take you up on that. Everybody grew up in the 80s watching the Mets. They were on TV. We didn't really always cheer for them, but the amazing Mets of 1986. Was that the year when they hit the ball through the guy's legs and scored?
Absolutely.
Hey, Jonathan, do you think I should move to New York City one day?
Absolutely, because there's no city that ticks like the city of New York. It's the greatest place in the world. That's why they call it the Big Apple.
Yeah, Mappy, I think you'd have a lot of fun, but I feel like you'd probably get a little overwhelmed with all the people. Mappy doesn't like stimulation too much, so.
You get used to it.
Yeah. Are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. And I can also help you find your new house, too. Email me and I'll work with you on not just helping you figure out where to move, but I can help you find your perfect home, too. That's right. I know awesome, reliable agents all over the country, and I'd love to connect you to somebody who can help you search for that perfect home. Hey everyone, so it's pretty clear by now that elected leaders aren't going to help you. If you don't like what you saw in this video, demanding change won't work. You're going to have to do it on your own. If you want to be safe and want your community to be a place where people want to live, you're going to have to clean the place up yourselves. You're going to have to work with your friends and neighbors to lower crime. Politicians clearly don't care as much anymore. It's up to us.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.